Popi was 24 years old, and Bonjika Fungula was 28. Both women came from the southeastern province of KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. They shared a common origin in modest households, raised in communities where financial limitations were part of daily life. Despite these constraints, both Popi and Bonjika pursued education with determination and found a meaningful connection while studying drama in Durban, the largest city in KwaZulu-Natal. Their friendship grew through a shared passion for the arts. Theater, performance, and storytelling became not just their fields of study, but the center of their aspirations. They were both driven by a deep love for creative expression and a desire to build meaningful lives through their talent and training. After completing their studies, they made the life-changing decision to relocate together to Johannesburg, a move driven by ambition, courage, and the pursuit of opportunity. In Johannesburg, they lived together, supported each other emotionally, and worked to establish themselves in the city's competitive creative sector. Their journey was not easy, but they remained hopeful. Bonjika balanced her artistic ambitions with the responsibilities of being a mother to her child, showing both strength and resilience. Together, Popi and Bonjika represented the kind of hopeful, talented young women striving for better futures in an environment that often made progress difficult. Their story, before it turned tragic, was one of friendship, perseverance, and shared dreams. This context, who they were, where they came from, and what they aimed to become, remains vital in understanding the depth of the loss that followed. On the night of May 12, 2017, Popi and Bonjika Fungula set out together in Johannesburg, South Africa. They boarded a minibus taxi with the intention of spending the evening in Soweto. That decision would mark the last time they were seen alive. After they left, no communication was received from either woman. Hours passed without word, and as the night wore on, their loved ones grew increasingly concerned. The next morning, with no signs of their return, a desperate search began. Family members made numerous calls and checked known locations. Their efforts to locate Popi and Bonjika were met with silence. Then, the first devastating discovery came. Popi's body was found in Naledi, a suburb of Soweto, later that same day, May 12th. She had suffered a fatal gunshot wound to the upper body. Less than 24 hours later, Bonjika's body was located in a different Soweto suburb, Tladi. She too had sustained a gunshot wound to the upper body. The two areas, though both within Soweto, are not adjacent, raising further questions about the events that unfolded that night. There were strong indications that both women may have been sexually assaulted before their deaths. However, it was later reported that no rape kits had been used during the post-mortem examinations. The absence of such crucial forensic procedures left a major gap in the investigation. To further complicate matters, complete forensic reports were never publicly released. This section marks a critical point in the timeline, when two ambitious, creative young women disappeared during a simple evening out and were later found brutally murdered. It also highlights the early signs of investigative failure, as essential evidence was either overlooked or never properly collected. Following the tragic discovery of Popi and Bonjika Fungula's bodies, the investigation began under intense emotional and public pressure. However, the initial police response was marked by inconsistencies and limited transparency. It was not until May 21st, 2017, 9 days after the women were last seen, that two suspects were arrested. Alec Magala Mamathame, age 43, and Sandown Nkosi, age 25, both minibus taxi drivers, were taken into custody. They were formally charged with murder, robbery, and kidnapping. What led police to the suspects was the tracking system installed in the minibus taxi the women had entered. In South Africa, vehicle tracking is common due to frequent hijackings. According to Mamathame's account, he had informed the taxi's owner, Johannes Mkwanatsi, that the vehicle had been hijacked by three men while Popi and Bonjika were still inside. They claimed to have gone to Jabulani police station together, waiting for officers to act. While there, Mkwanatsi received information from the tracking company that the taxi had been located in Mapetla, another Soweto suburb. Police arrived at the Mapetla location, where the vehicle was found abandoned. It was at this point that the investigation intensified. Inside the taxi, unspecified belongings of the victims were recovered. More importantly, During the arrest of Sandow Nkosi, a mobile phone and a lipstick belonging to one of the victims were found in his possession. However, it was unclear why Nkosi had access to the vehicle or how he came to possess these items. Notably, no eyewitness testimony or surveillance footage was referenced as part of the evidence against either suspect. The initial breakthrough in the case came solely from the tracking system and the physical items recovered, leaving major questions about how the investigation was being conducted. After their arrests, both Alec Magala Mamathame and Sandow Nkosi provided statements to authorities, attempting to explain their involvement and clarify the events of May 12, 2017. Mamathame, the primary driver of the taxi, offered a detailed but questionable account. He claimed that on the night in question, his taxi was occupied by 5 passengers, 3 men and 2 women, later identified as Popi and Bonjika Fungula. According to Mamathame, the 3 men suddenly hijacked the vehicle during the ride. He alleged that he managed to escape by jumping out of the moving taxi, leaving the 2 women behind with the hijackers. Following the supposed escape, Mamathame said he contacted the taxi's owner, Johannes Mkwanatsi. Together, they went to Jabulani police station to report the incident. While they waited, Mkwanatsi received a call from the vehicle tracking company. The taxi had been located in Mapetla, a Soweto suburb. They rushed to the scene, where they found that the police and the tracking company were already present. The individuals who had reportedly hijacked the vehicle had fled by the time they arrived. Despite this timeline, there is no official police record of Mamathame reporting the hijacking. No formal documentation exists to confirm his version of events. This critical omission casts doubt on the credibility of his account. Sandow Nkosi's involvement remains murky. He admitted to taking one of the victims' phones when he parked the taxi, but did not explain how he came to be in possession of the vehicle or who instructed him to handle it. His connection to the timeline remains largely unclarified. These unclear, unverified statements only deepen the confusion around what truly happened that night, raising serious concerns about the investigation's reliability. Despite the brutal nature of the murders of Popi and Bonjika Fungula, the police investigation was marred by serious forensic failures. From the outset, crucial procedures were either neglected or inadequately carried out. The taxi, which should have been treated as a primary crime scene, was not subjected to a thorough forensic examination. There was no publicly documented evidence of DNA sampling, fingerprint analysis, fiber collection, shoe print comparison, or any form of trace evidence being gathered from a vehicle. The investigating officer claimed in court that forensic evidence existed, yet no concrete materials were presented. A key example was the alleged presence of blood in the taxi. While such a discovery could have been vital, it was never formally confirmed through testing or included in an investigation record. Without forensic validation, this claim remained speculative. Additionally, no effort was made to clearly establish who had been inside the taxi that night. In a case where 5 individuals, including the 2 victims, were allegedly present, this oversight was significant. There were no known attempts to collect or analyze biological or physical traces from the suspected hijackers, or even to determine whether the accused had left any evidence behind. Surveillance footage or eyewitness accounts were also absent, further limiting the scope of inquiry. These investigative shortcomings severely weakened the case. The failure to gather and preserve forensic evidence meant there was little to support the charges brought against the suspects. In court, the lack of verifiable data undermined the prosecution's credibility. The absence of clear evidence contributed directly to the suspects being granted bail and the eventual collapse of the case. As a result, justice for Popi and Bonjika was obstructed not only by violence but by systemic negligence in law enforcement procedures. As the investigation into the murders of Popi and Bonjika Fungula proceeded, the matter was brought before the court for bail hearings. However, the process quickly revealed the fragility of the case built by investigators. During the hearings, the magistrate expressed concern over the lack of specificity in the statement provided by the investigating officer. Key details were missing, and claims of forensic evidence were not supported by any documented or submitted material. Due to these vague and non-substantiated claims, the magistrate postponed the hearing, requesting clearer evidence and firmer testimony. Despite the seriousness of the charges, murder, robbery, and kidnapping, There was no physical proof presented to establish a connection between the suspects and the murders. No DNA, no fingerprints, and most notably, no firearm linked to the fatal gunshot wounds had been recovered. Eventually, both Alec Magala Mamathame and Sandal Nkosi were granted bail due to the weakness of the state's case. The lack of verified forensic evidence left the prosecution with no foundation on which to proceed. The investigating officer briefly mentioned that there might have been other suspects involved, but no efforts were made to explore those leads further. With insufficient evidence and no confirmed forensic links tying anyone to the crime, the case stalled entirely. Charges were dropped and no additional arrests followed. For the families of Popi and Bonjika, this legal and procedural breakdown was devastating. What began as a search for justice ended in silence, with no answers and no accountability for the violent loss of their daughters. By 2020, 3 years after the brutal murders of Popi and Bonjika Fungula, the case had made little progress. Full forensic reports had still not been released, and no new suspects had been identified or arrested. This lack of action led to growing frustration among the victims' families and the broader public. The families publicly criticized the South African Police Service for investigative failures, citing a lack of transparency, procedural mistakes, and an overall indifference toward justice for the two women. In response to this stagnation, Amnesty International launched a global advocacy effort under its well-known Right for Rights campaign. The organization called on the public worldwide to demand accountability and action from the South African authorities. The campaign emphasized not only the need for justice in this specific case, but also highlighted the broader pattern of violence against women and inadequate investigations in South Africa. The response was overwhelming. Amnesty International collected 316,796 signatures from people across the globe, each calling for the reopening of the investigation into Popi and Bonjika's murders. These signatures were formally handed over to the South African police. In a public statement, the authorities acknowledged the petition and committed to reopening the case. Although the promise marked a symbolic step forward, it did not immediately lead to visible progress. Still, the campaign succeeded in placing renewed pressure on the justice system and bringing international attention to the case. Through civil society efforts, the names of Popi and Bonjika remained present in the public consciousness, despite the system's initial failure to deliver justice. In June 2023, 6 years after the tragic deaths of Popi and Bonjika Fungula, a new development brought renewed hope to their families and supporters. South Africa's National Director of Public Prosecutions, Shamila Batohi, officially announced that the case had been referred to Protea Magistrates Court for an inquest. This move signaled a potential turning point. While an inquest is not a criminal trial, it serves a vital legal function by examining the circumstances surrounding a death. If successful, it could determine how Popi and Bonjika died, and possibly who was responsible. For the families, this was a long-awaited sign of progress. The inquest offered a possibility of uncovering facts that had been buried or overlooked and might lead to future legal proceedings. It also reflected increasing public pressure and the growing recognition that the initial investigation had failed to meet the standards required in a case of this magnitude. However, this momentum was short-lived. Once again, the investigating officer failed to provide sufficient information to proceed. Without detailed forensic reports, clear evidence, or an updated investigative file, the inquest process could not begin. This setback echoed the same systemic issues that had plagued the case from the start: lack of evidence, poor documentation, and limited accountability. Though the inquest remains officially pending, the absence of concrete progress has once again left the families in limbo. What was meant to be a step toward truth has become yet another example of a justice system unable or unwilling to deliver answers. The murders of Popi and Bonjika Fungula remain unresolved years after their deaths. Despite efforts to reopen the investigation and the announcement of an inquest in 2023, no significant progress has been made. The inquest has been delayed, and no new suspects have been identified or charged. The families of the two women continue to live without answers, left with uncertainty and grief that is compounded by the slow or stagnant justice system. This case is not isolated, but reflects a much larger issue within South Africa, one of widespread femicide and gender-based violence. South Africa has some of the highest rates of violence against women in the world. Many cases, like Popi and Bonjika's, are marked by inadequate investigations, limited accountability, and failures to protect victims or pursue justice effectively. These systemic problems contribute to a culture where violence against women often goes unpunished. The lack of closure for families adds another layer of tragedy. When justice is delayed or denied, it deepens a trauma experienced by loved ones and communities. The difficulties in this case expose how investigative gaps, insufficient forensic procedures, and procedural shortcomings prevent justice not only in high-profile cases, but across the country. Ultimately, Popi and Bonjika's story serves as a stark reminder of the ongoing challenges facing South Africa. Their unresolved murders highlight the urgent need for reforms in law enforcement, forensic capabilities, and judicial processes to address the epidemic of violence against women. Without these changes, many more families will remain trapped in the same painful cycle of loss and silence. Despite the passage of time, the murders of Popi and Bonjika Fungula remain unsolved. Justice has yet to be served, and their families continue to search for answers. If you have any information related to the events of May 12, 2017, or anything that could help move this case forward, your knowledge could be invaluable. Even small details, which may seem insignificant to you, can provide important leads for investigators. You are encouraged to come forward and share what you know. If you are concerned about your privacy or safety, you have the option to remain anonymous. Providing information anonymously can protect your identity while still allowing law enforcement to follow up on tips that might break this case open. The investigation into Popi and Bonjika's murder stalled due to lack of evidence. New information from the public could reopen doors that have long been closed. Every piece of information helps create a clearer picture and could lead to the identification of suspects or uncover overlooked evidence. If you have any relevant knowledge, please reach out through the official contact channels provided. Your cooperation could make a difference, not only in solving this case, but in delivering the justice these two women and their families deserve. Do not hesitate. Your voice could be the key to finally bringing closure to this tragic story.